when a team of forensic investigators discovered a child's handprint pressed in dried blood beneath 7 layers of wallpaper at 47 Elm Street. They thought they'd found evidence of a single tragedy. But as the house reluctantly gave up its secrets, what they uncovered wasn't just a crime scene. It was an archive of horrors spanning more than a century. The diary found hidden in the attic revealed the most disturbing entry. The children say there's something living in the walls. Tonight I heard it too. It's hungry. This wasn't just another haunted house story. It was a documented case that local authorities still refuse to discuss publicly. But before we dive into the macabre history of the Foster home on Elm Street, I'm curious. Have you ever felt something unexplainable in an old building? Something that made your skin crawl even when you were completely alone? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever experienced anything truly inexplicable. And don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to follow this entire series to understand how deep this nightmare truly goes. Long before anyone called it the Foster home, 47 Elm Street was already infamous among locals. The Victorian mansion was built in 1896 on land that had previously housed the Elmwood Children's Sanitarium, a facility meant to treat tuberculosis in the era's most vulnerable patients. The sanitarium's history ended abruptly one frigid December night when flames engulfed the wooden structure. Official records claim all patients were evacuated, but newspaper clippings from 1894 tell a different story. Tragedy at Elmwood, reads the yellowed headline I'm holding from the county archives. 16 souls lost to midnight blaze. What's peculiar isn't just the death toll. It's what witnesses reported seeing that night. A local farmer, Edmund Clark, gave a sworn statement that still sends chills down my spine. I saw them gathered at the highest window. 7, maybe 8 small figures pressed against the glass. But none called for help. None tried to escape. They just watched the flames climb, like they were waiting for something worse than the fire. The investigation into the fire was suspiciously brief. The official cause was listed as heating malfunction, but rumors spread quickly. Some said the doctor who ran the sanitarium had been conducting experiments on the children, treatments that went far beyond accepted medical practice. Others whispered about bizarre religious rituals performed in the basement. Whatever the truth, the land remained vacant for 2 years. Nobody would touch it. That changed when Jonathan Foster, a railroad magnate looking to establish himself in high society, purchased the property at a fraction of its value. Foster either didn't know about the land's history or chose to ignore it. Construction workers reported finding small bones while digging the foundation, but Foster insisted they were animal remains and ordered them buried deeper. Architectural records show something unusual about Foster's mansion design. The basement was unnecessarily large, with strange chambers that didn't align with typical Victorian homes. Most disturbing was a room measuring exactly 7 feet by 7 feet, with no windows and a floor that sloped toward a central drain. When questioned, the architect said Foster called it a prayer room. Foster moved his family in during the summer of 1896, but their residence was short-lived. Historical accounts describe a series of tragedies. First, the drowning of Foster's youngest daughter in a bathtub, then his wife's sudden illness and death 3 months later. By 1897, Foster himself was reportedly suffering from nervous agitation and nocturnal terrors. His diary, partially preserved in the County Historical Society, contains increasingly disturbed entries. October 15, 1897. The sounds from within the walls continue. Margaret insists it's mice, but mice don't whisper. They don't call your name when you're alone. December 4, 1897. Found Emily sleepwalking again. 3rd time this week. Always toward the basement. Always saying the same thing. They're waiting for us to join them. January 17, 1898. I've nailed the basement door shut. Something down there is changing, growing. I can feel it when I walk across the floor, like something pushing up from below. By spring of 1898, Foster abandoned the house entirely. He relocated to Boston and never returned to Elm Street. When interviewed years later, he refused to discuss the property, saying only, "Some land isn't meant to be built upon. Some ground holds memories best left undisturbed." The house remained empty for nearly a decade. Local children dared each other to approach the porch or peek through windows. Those who did reported seeing shadow children inside. Figures that moved from room to room despite the house being empty. One particularly detailed account comes from Thomas Wilson, who was 12 years old in 1905. "We broke in through the kitchen window on a dare. The place smelled like wet earth and something else, something sweet but rotten. Jimmy went upstairs while I checked the parlor. That's when I heard it. A child singing, real quiet like, coming from behind the walls. Not like someone was in another room, like they were inside the actual wall. Then Jimmy screamed from upstairs and we ran. He never told anyone what he saw in the attic, but he didn't speak for 3 days after." Between 1898 and 1932, 6 different families attempted to live in the Foster mansion. None stayed longer than 8 months. Common complaints included persistent cold spots, unexplained noises, and children becoming uncharacteristically withdrawn. The Parker family, who lived there in 1917, reported finding strange drawings appearing on their daughter's bedroom wall. Crude chalk figures showing adults with exaggerated frowning faces and children with no features at all. Local churches avoided involvement with the property. Pastor William Thornton of First Methodist Church wrote in 1921, "There are places where the veil between worlds grows thin. The Foster house isn't haunted in the common understanding. It's something worse. It's hungry. The Great Depression changed everything. As economic hardship spread, property values plummeted. Homeless families and orphan children became increasingly common sights on city streets. It was in this climate of desperation that the house on Elm Street found new purpose. In late 1931, the Ecumenical Children's Mission, led by Sister Agnes Caldwell, purchased the property for a nominal sum. Their intention, to convert the mansion into a sanctuary for orphan children. Sister Agnes was warned by locals about the house's reputation, but dismissed their concerns as superstition. "This house will serve God's purpose," she was quoted saying at the dedication ceremony. "These walls will protect His most vulnerable children." Renovations began in January 1932. Workers reported unusual difficulties. Tools disappeared, completed work was found undone the next morning, and several men quit after claiming to hear children crying inside sealed rooms. Most disturbing was the discovery made when workers removed wallpaper in the main hallway. Dozens of tiny handprints pressed into the plaster beneath, all at the height of a small child. Sister Agnes ordered the walls repainted immediately and doubled the workers' pay to ensure their silence. By spring, the renovations were complete. The Foster mansion was transformed into Elm Street Children's Home, with dormitories for up to 20 orphans, quarters for caretakers, and a small chapel in what had once been the parlor. The home officially opened on May 7, 1932. 12 children, ages 4 to 11, were the first residents. Photographs from the opening ceremony show them lined up on the front steps, wearing donated clothes, their expressions solemn. Sister Agnes stands behind them, smiling broadly. None of the children are smiling. What nobody realized that day was that the home's opening wasn't an end to the Foster mansion's dark history. It was just the beginning of its most terrifying chapter. In our next chapter, we'll explore the disturbing events that unfolded during the home's first 5 years, and the mysterious disappearances that would eventually force its closure. The darkness that had been growing beneath 47 Elm Street was about to reveal itself in ways that even Sister Agnes, with all her faith, couldn't possibly combat. The Elm Street Children's Home began with hopeful intentions. Sister Agnes Caldwell had dedicated her life to caring for orphan children, and the spacious mansion offered a solution to the overcrowded conditions at the mission's downtown shelter. Local newspapers praised the initiative, calling it a beacon of Christian charity in troubled times. But from the very first night, something was clearly wrong. Clara Bennett was hired as the night matron, responsible for overseeing the children during sleeping hours. Her journal, discovered decades later in a trunk in her sister's attic, provides the earliest documentation of the disturbances. Her first entry, dated May 8, 1932, reads, "First night at Elm Street home complete. Children finally settled around midnight. The building makes such strange noises. Not the usual creaks of an old house, but something almost rhythmic, like breathing. Around 2 a.m., found little Mary standing in the hallway, staring at the wall. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was listening to the children in the walls. Brought her back to bed. Must speak to Sister Agnes about Mary's imagination. But it wasn't just Mary. Within 2 weeks, 5 different children reported hearing other children, calling to them from inside the walls, beneath the floorboards, or behind closed doors. Sister Agnes initially dismissed these accounts as nightmares or attention-seeking behavior. She instructed the staff to say extra prayers with any child reporting such experiences. By June, the incidents had escalated. Clara's journal entry from June 17 describes a particularly disturbing night. Awakened at 3:15 a.m. by screaming from the boys' dormitory. Found young Thomas convulsing in his bed, eyes rolled back, chanting words I couldn't understand. Not English, not any language I recognize. The other boys were huddled together in terror. When Thomas finally calmed, he had no memory of the episode but complained of a terrible headache. There are scratch marks on his arms that he cannot explain. Sister Agnes brought in Father Michael Donovan from St. Patrick's Parish to bless the home. His letter to the diocese, dated June 25, 1932, hints at his unease. I performed the blessing as requested, though I must confess to experiencing a profound disquiet while inside that house. The children seem unnaturally subdued. During prayers, I observed several of them staring fixedly at the walls rather than bowing their heads. Most concerning was the behavior of the house itself. Doors that refused to remain closed, unexplainable cold spots, and a persistent odor of damp earth in rooms that should be dry. I recommended to Sister Agnes that she consider relocating the children, but she remains determined to reclaim this house for God's work. July brought new staff to Elm Street. Harriet Winters was hired as a daytime caretaker, responsible for supervising the children's education and recreation. Unlike Sister Agnes, Harriet took the children's stories seriously. Her personal letters to her mother reveal increasing concern. August 3, 1932. The children have a game they play called the Whispering Game. They press their ears to the walls and then repeat what they hear. What troubles me is how consistent their stories are. They all describe hearing children crying, pleading to be let out, or warning about the bad doctor. When I ask where they learned these stories, they insist they're not stories at all. August 17, 1932. Found a hidden door today behind the pantry shelves. It leads to a narrow staircase going down, not to the main basement, but somewhere deeper. Sister Agnes says it's just an old coal chute and has forbidden anyone from exploring it. When I asked why it was hidden behind a shelf rather than simply locked, she changed the subject. By autumn of 1932, the home had developed troubling routines. Staff would find children sleepwalking nightly, always heading toward the basement or certain walls. Objects would disappear, only to be found arranged in bizarre patterns in unlikely places. Several children developed a habit of drawing the same figure. A tall, thin man with elongated fingers and no face, standing among smaller figures that appeared to be children. Most disturbing were the physical manifestations. Children would wake with bruises shaped like fingerprints on their arms or legs. Others developed deep scratches overnight that couldn't be explained. The Parker boy, age 9, was found one morning with a perfect handprint burned into his back. Too small to belong to an adult, but precisely the size of a child's hand. Sister Agnes's response was to intensify religious instruction and limit outside contact. She dismissed 3 staff members who expressed concerns, replacing them with devoted church members who followed her instructions without question. Local Dr. Franklin Pierce, who examined the children in November 1932, wrote in his medical notes, "The children at Elm Street exhibit signs of severe anxiety and sleep deprivation. Many show evidence of self-harm or, more troublingly, harm from an unidentified source." Sister Agnes refuses to discuss the possibility of moving them to another facility and has now restricted my access to once-monthly visits rather than weekly. I have brought my concerns to the attention of the Children's Welfare Board, but no action has been taken. The first disappearance occurred on January 17, 1933. 6-year-old Elizabeth Connors vanished from her bed sometime between midnight bed check and morning wake-up. The police report details an extensive search of the house and surrounding neighborhood. No trace of Elizabeth was ever found. Sister Agnes suggested the girl might have run away to find her mother, who had abandoned her at the mission a year earlier. Clara Bennett's journal tells a different story. January 18, 1933, Elizabeth is gone. The other children say, the wall people took her. Little Anna claims she saw Elizabeth getting out of bed and walking to the closet, where hands came out of the wall and pulled her inside. I found something scratched into the closet wall. It looks like a child tried to write, help, with her fingernails. Sister Agnes had the closet nailed shut this morning and told the children not to make up stories. Over the next 4 years, 4 more children would vanish without a trace from Elm Street. Robert Sullivan, age 8, disappeared March 1934. The official report suggests he climbed out a window, though the window was found locked from the inside. Twins Michael and Matthew Perry, age 5, vanished simultaneously from different rooms in August 1935. Their beds were found empty but undisturbed, with no signs of struggle. Grace Harper, age 10, disappeared April 1937. She had repeatedly told staff that someone in the walls was threatening to take her. The night before she vanished, she tried to remain awake by pinching herself repeatedly, leaving bruises on her arms. Each disappearance followed a pattern. Increased reports of whispering from the walls, children drawing disturbing images, and unexplained sounds throughout the house. After each incident, Sister Agnes would intensify prayer sessions and further isolate the home from outside scrutiny. Harriet Winters was dismissed in late 1935 after she attempted to contact authorities with her concerns. Her final letter to her mother reveals her desperation. I know what's happening in this place is evil. The children who disappear aren't running away, they're being taken. I've heard the sounds myself now. Not just whispers, but scratching, like something trying to get through the walls. Last night I saw something I cannot explain. A child's hand pushing through the wallpaper in the hallway, the paper stretching like fabric before the hand retreated. I'm being watched constantly now. If anything happens to me, tell the police to tear down the walls of this cursed place. By 1937, even Sister Agnes could no longer deny the pattern. After Grace Harper's disappearance, she finally contacted church authorities requesting an investigation. The diocese sent Father Thomas Walsh, who had experience with what the church carefully termed unusual spiritual manifestations. His confidential report to the bishop, sealed until 1972, contains this chilling assessment. What exists at 47 Elm Street goes beyond mere haunting. The house itself seems to have developed a hunger, one specifically directed at children. The history of the land, particularly the sanitarium fire and the experiments rumored to have been conducted there, suggests a profound desecration that has never been properly addressed. The disappearances follow a pattern consistent with an entity that is growing stronger with each child it takes. I have recommended immediate evacuation of the premises and a full spiritual cleansing. Until then, no child should spend another night under that roof. The diocese acted quickly. By June 1937, all remaining children were relocated to other facilities. Sister Agnes, her faith shaken by the events, requested reassignment to administrative duties away from childcare. The Elm Street Children's Home was officially closed on June 28, 1937. Before leaving, Clara Bennett made one final entry in her journal. Last night in this dreadful house, as I packed my belongings, I heard something new. Not children's voices, but laughter. Deep, satisfied laughter coming from behind every wall. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper in the main hallway and heard a voice, clear as day, whisper, "We'll wait. They always bring more. Children taste of innocence. God forgive us for what we've allowed to happen here." The house at 47 Elm Street was locked and abandoned once again. The diocese attempted to sell the property, but no buyers came forward. Local rumors about the missing children kept interest at bay. The house remained empty for 15 years, its windows boarded, its secrets locked inside. But the story of Elm Street was far from over. The most horrifying chapter was yet to begin, when a deeply religious couple named Leonard and Ruth Mather would reopen the house in 1952, believing themselves called by God to reclaim this place for His work. They had no idea what was really calling to them from within those walls, or what it would drive them to do to the children placed in their care. By 1952, the house at 47 Elm Street had fallen into severe disrepair. Vandals had broken windows, local teenagers had used the porch for drinking parties, and the once grand Victorian architecture was obscured by overgrown vegetation. The property had passed from the diocese to the county after years of unpaid taxes. Most locals avoided the place entirely, crossing to the other side of the street when passing by. Parents warned children to stay away, though they rarely explained why. The disappearances from the 1930s had become the kind of story people preferred not to discuss. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a couple arrived in town with an interest in the property. Leonard and Ruth Mather were in their early 40s, childless and deeply religious. Leonard was a former seminary student who had left before ordination, explaining he felt called to serve God's will in the world rather than from the pulpit. Ruth was a soft-spoken woman who had worked as a nurse in a religious hospital. They presented themselves as devout Christians looking to establish a home for children in need. County records show they purchased the property for a nominal amount, just enough to cover the back taxes. Local officials, eager to rid themselves of the problematic estate, asked few questions about the Mathers' background or qualifications. The sale was finalized on October 17, 1952. Martin Green, who worked at the county clerk's office, later recalled the day the Mathers signed the paperwork. There was something odd about them, too perfect, like characters from a radio program rather than real people. Ruth kept smiling this empty smile, and when I mentioned the house's history, just trying to make sure they knew what they were getting into, Leonard cut me off mid-sentence. He said, "We know exactly what that house is. That's why we've come." The Mathers began renovations immediately, working with remarkable speed and mostly without hired help. Leonard did much of the physical labor himself, while Ruth focused on the interior. They declined offers of assistance from local church groups, stating they preferred to prepare the home themselves according to specific requirements. By January 1953, the exterior was transformed, freshly painted in a somber gray with black trim, new windows installed, and the yard cleared of overgrowth. The first children arrived in February 1953. Unlike the previous orphanage, the Mathers didn't work with official agencies. They established what they called a private Christian fostering ministry, taking in children through informal arrangements with overwhelmed parents, distant relatives unable to care for young family members, or directly from the streets. No formal adoption papers were filed. No government oversight was requested or offered. Evelyn Porter, who lived next door, remembered the first arrivals. 3 children came that first day, 2 boys and a girl, all under 10 years old. They looked shell-shocked, clutching little suitcases. Ruth lined them up on the porch and made them recite something. A prayer or pledge, I couldn't quite hear. Then they went inside and the curtains were drawn. I didn't see those children playing outside once in the weeks that followed. The Mathers kept to themselves but made strategic appearances at local churches, presenting themselves as dedicated foster parents providing strict Christian upbringing to troubled children who needed firm guidance. They spoke of their methods in vague terms, emphasizing structure, discipline, and religious instruction. When questioned about the children's schooling, Leonard would explain they were homeschooled according to a specialized curriculum focused on spiritual development. By the end of 1953, neighbors estimated 8 to 10 children lived in the house, though they were rarely seen outside. The property was surrounded by a tall wooden fence Leonard constructed that spring, making it difficult to observe daily life at the home. The few glimpses neighbors caught were unsettling. Children standing perfectly still in the yard, arranged in straight lines for what appeared to be hours of prayer, regardless of weather conditions. Frank Wilson, who delivered groceries to the home weekly, provided one of the few first-hand accounts of the interior during this period. The house was always dark, curtains drawn, minimal lighting. Ruth would meet me at the door and never invite me past the foyer. The children I glimpsed were absolutely silent, moving like ghosts through the hallway. Once I heard what sounded like singing coming from the basement, children's voices in perfect unison, but the melody was discordant, nothing like the Sunday school songs I knew. When I mentioned it, Ruth's face changed for just a second. She said, "The children are learning to harmonize with voices only they can hear." The Mather's operation expanded gradually. By 1957, delivery records suggest enough food was being purchased to feed 15 to 20 children. Yet school records show no children registered with the Mather name or address. Dr. Eleanor Wright, the local pediatrician, noted in her private records that she found it deeply concerning that no children from the Mather home ever appeared for medical care, despite the statistical certainty that such a large group would experience routine childhood illnesses or injuries. When concerns were occasionally raised by neighbors or church members, the Mathers had a consistent response. They would invite the concerned party to a carefully orchestrated Sunday dinner. These events featured clean, well-dressed children who recited Bible verses and spoke in rehearsed phrases about their gratitude for the Mathers' care. These dinners always seemed to alleviate immediate concerns, though several guests later commented on how the children never made eye contact and spoke in unnaturally flat tones. Reverend James Harper from First Baptist Church attended one such dinner in 1958. His letter to a colleague, discovered after his death in 1982, reveals his lingering unease. The evening at the Mathers was a perfectly orchestrated performance. Too perfect. The children spoke when spoken to, ate without spilling a crumb, and recited scripture with machine-like precision. Yet there was something behind their eyes, or rather, something missing. When I asked one boy, about 9 years old, what games he enjoyed playing, he looked to Mrs. Mather before answering that play leads to idleness, and idleness is the devil's workshop. The meal concluded with Leonard leading the children in what he called their protection prayers, bizarre invocations against the voices that lie and the hands that reach through the night. I left with a profound disquiet I cannot fully articulate. The early 1960s marked a shift in the Mathers' behavior. They became increasingly reclusive, withdrawing from even their limited community involvement. Leonard stopped attending church altogether, explaining that he had received direct instructions for a more pure form of worship. Ruth was occasionally seen in town, always alone, purchasing supplies in quantities that suggested stockpiling. Several shopkeepers noted her increasingly gaunt appearance and distracted manner. Most concerning was the changing pattern of children at the home. Neighbors noticed that while new children continued to arrive every few months, familiar faces would disappear without explanation. When questioned, the Mathers offered vague explanations about children being placed with permanent families or transferred to specialized facilities. No records of such placements or transfers were ever filed with local authorities. Margaret Davis, who taught piano lessons in the neighborhood, recalled a troubling encounter from 1962. "I was walking past the house at dusk when I heard a child crying. Not normal crying, but the kind of hopeless sobbing that chills your blood. I stopped and listened. It seemed to be coming from an open basement window. Then I heard Ruth's voice, so different from her usual soft tone. Harsh, almost guttural. She was saying, 'Cry all you want. The walls absorb tears. They've absorbed so many before yours.' I reported it to the sheriff the next day, but nothing came of it." By 1963, unusual physical features began to appear on the property. Leonard constructed what he described to curious neighbors as a prayer garden in the backyard, a circular arrangement of 7 stone pillars surrounding a central pit. The area was kept carefully screened from outside view by tall hedges. Several times a month, residents on adjacent properties reported hearing chanting from this area late at night, often accompanied by what sounded like children crying. The Mathers also made extensive modifications to the home's interior. Building permits filed in 1964 reference the construction of specialized prayer rooms and an isolation chamber for spiritual reflection. The contractor initially hired quit after 2 weeks, telling friends at the local bar that he wouldn't be part of building what looked like cells for children. Leonard completed the work himself. A visiting missionary, Sister Catherine Blackwood, who was briefly invited to the home in 1965 to share her experiences in Africa, left a detailed account in her journal. The Mathers have transformed this house into something that resembles a medieval monastery designed by someone who has only read about religious practices but never experienced true faith. The walls are covered with handwritten scriptures, but the verses selected focus exclusively on punishment, cleansing, and the inherent sinfulness of children. Most disturbing was what Ruth called the purification room, a small, windowless chamber with a drain in the center of the floor and restraints bolted to the wall. When I expressed shock, Ruth explained it was where children confronted their demons through intensive prayer sessions. The children I observed moved through the house with a kind of blank terror, following Leonard and Ruth's instructions with mechanical precision. When I attempted to speak privately with one girl, Ruth appeared instantly, as if she had been listening at the door. I was not invited back, and I have prayed for those children every day since. As 1965 drew to a close, the Mathers operation had reached its most established form. From the outside, 47 Elm Street appeared well-maintained if forbidding, its gray exterior meticulously painted, the yard kept pristine, the high fence ensuring privacy. Few in the community questioned what happened behind that fence anymore. The occasional concerns were dismissed as rumors or exaggerations. Without formal oversight or regular visitors, the Mathers had created a closed system, a world entirely under their control. But control was exactly what the house had been offering them all along. What neighbors couldn't see were the changes occurring within the Mathers themselves. Leonard's journals, discovered decades later hidden in the attic, reveal a man increasingly convinced he was receiving divine messages, not from God, but from what he called the true authority within the walls. Ruth's behavior, according to rare accounts from children who survived the home, had transformed from stern discipline to sadistic ritual. The Mathers believed they were creating a holy sanctuary. In reality, they were feeding something much older and hungrier than any god they claimed to serve, something that had been waiting within the house since the sanitarium burned decades earlier. And in the years to come, that entity would demand sacrifices far beyond strict discipline and isolation. By the end of 1965, the stage was set for the most horrific phase of the Elm Street home's history, a period where the line between religious devotion and monstrous cruelty would dissolve completely, and where children would begin to disappear not just from public view, but from existence itself. By 1965, the Mather home had established a facade of strict religious discipline that kept outsiders at bay while concealing the increasingly disturbing reality within. What had begun as excessive religious zeal was transforming into something far more sinister, a transformation documented in Leonard Mather's private journals and later corroborated by survivors' testimonies. Leonard's entry from December 1965 marks a critical turning point. The voice came again last night, clearer than ever before, not from the Bible or my prayers, but from the northeast corner of the basement, the oldest part of the house. It speaks with authority about the children's corruption. They appear innocent, it says, but inside they harbor darkness that must be purged. Ruth doesn't hear it yet, but she believes me. The voice has revealed the true purpose of our calling. We aren't here to simply raise these children. We're here to cleanse them. The cleansing rituals began subtly. Children were subjected to increasingly longer prayer sessions, often forced to kneel on hard floors for hours until their knees bled. Food was withheld as a form of spiritual fasting, to weaken the body so the soul could be strengthened. But by early 1966, these practices had evolved into systematic torture justified as religious purification. Sarah Miller, who was placed with the Mathers at age 8 in 1966 and escaped in 1971, provided testimony to investigators. The basement had different rooms for different sins. The room of pride was ice cold, and you'd be stripped naked and made to recite your failings. The room of disobedience had hooks on the walls where they'd handcuff you for days. But the worst was the purification room. That's where they'd hold you underwater in a large metal tub while reciting prayers, again and again until you nearly drowned. They said water would clean the sin from inside you. Children who resisted were subjected to what the Mathers called the binding, restrained to their beds for days, fed only bread and water, while Ruth read the same biblical passages about demons and possession on a continuous loop from a tape recorder. Those who showed complete submission were rewarded with basic privileges like sufficient food or being allowed to sleep without restraints. Leonard's journal from September 1967 reveals his deteriorating mental state. The voice no longer comes only at night. It speaks throughout the day, guiding our work. It has taught me to recognize the signs of deep corruption in the children. A certain look in their eyes, resistance to pain, nightmares about leaving the house. These are signs that the darkness has taken root too deeply. Ruth understands now. She hears it too. Last night, she was the one who identified Emily as beyond salvation. The voice confirmed her judgment. Emily Reynolds, age 11, was the first child known to have died at the Mather's hands, though her death was never reported. According to Sarah Miller's testimony, Emily had attempted to escape in August 1967. After being recaptured, she was subjected to a 3-day purification that culminated in her death by drowning in the basement tub. Leonard's journal coldly notes, "Emily has been released from her corruption. The voice is pleased with our faithfulness. We buried her in the garden at midnight, beneath the eastern pillar where the morning sun first touches the ground. The other children helped dig the grave as their own lesson in the consequences of rebellion." Between 1967 and 1972, at least 4 more children died during purification rituals. According to survivors' accounts and Leonard's increasingly erratic journals, the bodies were buried in specific locations around the property, each position dictated by the voice and marked by small stone arrangements that Ruth maintained meticulously. With each death, the Mather's behavior became more ritualistic and detached from reality. The most disturbing development began in 1973, when Leonard started recording the purification sessions. Cassette tapes recovered from a hidden compartment in the basement captured hours of children's screams mixed with the Mather's prayers and, most chillingly, long periods of Leonard's one-sided conversations with the voice. Moments where he would fall silent, listening to something no one else could hear, before nodding and continuing the torture. One tape, labeled simply Jacob's Cleansing, October 1973, contains this horrifying exchange. Leonard, "The water purifies. The pain cleanses. Tell us what you see, Jacob." Sounds of gasping. A child choking. Ruth, "Hold him under longer this time. The voice says the demon is still inside him." Splashing. More choking. Leonard, "What do you see beneath the water, Jacob? Tell us what's reaching for you." Jacob, barely audible. "Hands? Children's hands? Pulling me down." Leonard, voice changing, becoming deeper. "Yes, they're waiting for you. They've always been waiting. Since the fire. Since the doctor's work was interrupted." Ruth, "Leonard." Leonard, normal voice returning. The voice is pleased. Jacob sees the truth now. While the horrors inside 47 Elm Street intensified, the Mather's public façade began showing cracks. Leonard, once meticulous about maintaining the property, allowed the exterior to deteriorate. Ruth, who had previously handled all interactions with the community, became increasingly reclusive and strange during her rare appearances in town. Marion Watson, a cashier at the local grocery store, recalled, "Ruth changed so much over those years. By 1975, she looked 20 years older than she was. Her hands would shake uncontrollably. Once, when I was bagging her groceries, mostly canned food and an alarming amount of bleach, she suddenly grabbed my wrist and whispered, 'Do you hear them too? The children in the walls.' Then she just smiled this horrible empty smile and acted like nothing had happened." The children kept at the home during this period were subjected to increasingly bizarre religious indoctrination. Leonard believed he was developing a pure faith directed by the voice in the walls. He forced the children to memorize what he called the true scriptures, his own writings that mixed biblical passages with disturbing additions. Survivors remember being made to recite phrases like, "The walls hold the truth. The hands reach to save us. The voice knows our sins. The water washes us clean." By 1976, the Mathers had become dangerously paranoid. Leonard's journals show increasing concern about outsiders who might interfere with their holy work. Windows were boarded over from the inside. Multiple locks were installed on every door. Children were kept in the basement for weeks at a time, only brought upstairs for intensive prayer sessions or punishments. The house's physical deterioration accelerated, with water damage spreading through the ceilings and walls, creating the perfect environment for the mold that would later be found to contain hallucinogenic properties, potentially contributing to the Mather's psychosis. The breaking point came in early 1979. 17-year-old Elias Dawson had been living at the Mather home since age 10. According to his later testimony, he had survived by showing complete submission while secretly planning his escape. On a rare trip to town with Ruth to carry groceries, Elias managed to steal a key from her purse. That night, he unlocked the basement room where 3 younger children were being held and led them through a coal chute that connected to the original foundation, a passage the Mathers had apparently never discovered. Only Elias and one other child, 12-year-old Alice Cooper, successfully escaped. The other 2 were recaptured by Leonard. According to Leonard's final journal entry, dated March 5, 1979, the betrayers have fled, carrying lies to the outside world. The voice is furious. It demands a greater sacrifice than ever before to purify the house. We will begin tonight with the recaptured ones. Then we will seal ourselves inside until the work is complete. The final purification has begun. Elias's appearance on Riverside Drive, 7 miles from the Mather home, sparked the investigation that would finally expose the House of Horrors. Sheriff Deputy Tom Richards was the first officer to encounter the teenager. "I was on night patrol when I saw this kid staggering down the middle of the road in a trance-like state. He was severely malnourished, covered in scars and burns. When I approached him, he just kept repeating one phrase over and over. 'They buried Elias, but he still screams.' It took us hours to realize he was Elias. He'd been so traumatized he was speaking about himself in the third person." Alice Cooper was found 2 days later, hiding in a drainage culvert near the highway. Her testimony, combined with Elias's, finally prompted authorities to obtain a warrant to search the Mather property. What they discovered would haunt investigators for decades to come. The house was empty of living occupants. Leonard and Ruth Mather had vanished, along with the remaining children. But evidence of atrocities was everywhere. Restraints bolted to walls, a basement purification room, with a large metal tub connected to a crude drainage system, blood-stained implements arranged on an altar-like table. Most disturbing were the 7 shallow graves discovered in the backyard garden, each marked with a small stone pillar. The search for the Mathers and the missing children became the largest investigation in the county's history. Records were scrutinized, revealing that over 30 children had passed through the Mathers' care since 1952, with no official documentation of their subsequent whereabouts. As the investigation expanded, an even more terrifying possibility emerged, that the Mathers themselves might have become victims of whatever malevolent force they believed resided in the house. This theory gained credibility when, in late April 1979, a final horrifying discovery was made. During an expanded search of the property, investigators broke through a recently constructed false wall in the basement. Behind it, they found a small chamber containing the bodies of Leonard and Ruth Mather, along with 2 children. The positions of the bodies suggested a ritual suicide, all 4 seated in a circle, holding hands, with evidence that Leonard had administered poison before taking it himself. A tape recorder was found in the center of the circle, containing Leonard's final message. "The voice has revealed the ultimate truth. We are not the cleansers. We are the sacrifice. The children are not the corrupted. They are the pure ones being harvested. We have been serving a hunger we did not understand. Now we join it willingly, completing the circle that began with the doctor's work in the old sanitarium. The walls will hold us forever. Listen closely and you'll hear us. All of us. We're in the walls now, and we're so hungry." The house at 47 Elm Street was cordoned off as a crime scene for months as forensic teams documented evidence and recovered remains. In total, the bodies of 7 children were exhumed from the property. Dental records and DNA testing would eventually identify them as children reported missing between 1967 and 1978. But investigators believed there were more victims whose bodies were never recovered. perhaps hidden in locations only the Mathers knew, or disposed of in ways that left no trace. The house itself seemed to resist the investigation. Multiple officers reported equipment malfunctions, inexplicable cold spots, and the persistent sensation of being watched. One crime scene photographer captured what appeared to be a child's handprint appearing on a wall that had been clean moments before. The photograph became infamous in paranormal circles, though official reports attributed it to previously unnoticed blood residue revealed by forensic lighting. As 1979 drew to a close, the full horror of what had occurred at 47 Elm Street was still being uncovered. But even as investigators pieced together the tangible evidence of the Mathers crimes, they couldn't shake the feeling that something intangible remained in that house. Something that had been there long before the Mathers arrived and would continue long after they were gone. The house would stand vacant for years afterward, its dark reputation now cemented in fact rather than rumor. But the story of 47 Elm Street was far from over. The horrors of the Mather era had fed whatever hungry presence dwelled within those walls, making it stronger, more patient, and ever more eager for new occupants to welcome into its embrace. The aftermath of the Mather case transformed 47 Elm Street from local rumor into national nightmare. When FBI agents joined the investigation in May 1979, media attention exploded. Headlines like House of Horror, Religious Couple's Deadly Cult, dominated newspapers across the country. Detective James Morgan, who led the local investigation, reflected years later. We thought we were investigating religious abuse, but the deeper we dug, the more it felt like we were uncovering horrors that predated the Mathers by decades. The house itself seemed to hold secrets. The most significant discovery came in August 1979 when investigators found Ruth Mather's personal diary hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible. Unlike Leonard's deranged spiritual journals, Ruth's diary was chillingly lucid, detailing the abuse with clinical precision. Her first entry after acquiring the house reads, "The house speaks to Leonard at night. He doesn't know I can hear him responding to silence. I worry for his mind, but we have committed to this path now." By 1965, her perspective had shifted dramatically. "I understand now. The house doesn't just speak to Leonard. It shares its history, its hunger. Last night I finally heard it too. Not a voice exactly, but a presence pressing against my thoughts. It showed me the truth about the doctor who once worked here, about the fire meant to hide his work, about the children who never truly left. We aren't saviors here. We're caretakers of something ancient that feeds on suffering." Ruth's later entries detailed their purification methods with disturbing detachment. The water ritual remains most effective. There's something about the moment when a child's survival instinct breaks, when they stop fighting and surrender to the water, that seems to satisfy the house most. We can feel it in the walls afterward, a kind of contented humming. Most horrifying was Ruth's final revelation. "Leonard still believes we're doing God's work, but I've accepted the truth. There is no salvation here, only appetite. The children who disappear into the walls don't ascend to heaven. They're consumed. Their energy feeds something that has lived in this ground since before the sanitarium, before the town. We've been its instruments, and soon we'll be its meal too." The diary provided investigators with specific locations to search for additional victims. By November 1979, the remains of 11 children had been recovered, some buried in the yard, others sealed within walls or beneath floorboards. Forensic analysis indicated they had died between 1967 and 1979, their ages ranging from 6 to 16. The final death toll was impossible to determine with certainty. Records suggested at least 31 children had passed through the Mathers' care since 1952. With 11 confirmed deceased and 9 verified survivors, 11 children remained unaccounted for. Dr. Thomas Reynolds, the forensic anthropologist who processed the remains, noted unusual patterns. "What struck me wasn't just the evidence of prolonged abuse before death, but what happened after. Several remains showed deterioration inconsistent with normal decomposition. It was as if something had been feeding on them." These observations were omitted from the final documentation as scientifically inconclusive. The house itself became central to the investigation. Structural engineers discovered that the basement extended deeper than original blueprints indicated, with sections incorporating foundations from the sanitarium. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalous spaces beneath these older sections, cavities that couldn't be easily explained. Environmental testing revealed extensive black mold, some varieties known to cause hallucinations when inhaled over long periods. This scientific explanation provided some comfort to investigators struggling with the case's more inexplicable elements. Yet the mold theory failed to account for the house's history before the Mathers or the experiences of the investigation team themselves. Multiple officers requested reassignment, citing nightmares and the persistent feeling of being watched inside the house. Officer Maria Rodriguez described her experience. "I'm a rational person with no belief in the supernatural, but that house, it got inside your head. I would be photographing evidence and suddenly feel small hands on my shoulders. One day I clearly heard a child whisper, 'Help us,' directly into my ear. When I turned around, I was completely alone." By December 1979, the investigation concluded. The Mather case was classified as murder-suicide with multiple homicide victims. Leonard and Ruth were posthumously charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, child abuse, and false imprisonment. The house was slated for demolition, but legal complications involving estate issues and survivors' claims kept it standing. A chain-link fence installed in 1980 did little to deter trespassers drawn by the house's notorious history. Throughout the 1980s, 47 Elm Street became an urban legend magnified by national attention. True crime books and a low-budget horror film sensationalized the case. Trespassers regularly reported unsettling experiences, temperature drops, whispers from empty rooms, and the sensation of being touched by unseen hands. The property was finally sold at auction in 1991 to developer Roland Thompson, who planned to demolish the structure. Within weeks, the project was plagued by accidents. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. Workers quit after claiming to see a child's face peering from boarded windows. Project foreman David Chun suffered a serious fall and later told Thompson, "There's something wrong with that place. When I was working in the bedroom, I heard scratching from inside the wall. When I knocked, something knocked back. 3 quick taps like a child playing a game." Thompson abandoned the demolition plans by summer 1992, citing unforeseen structural issues. The house remained standing, falling into deeper disrepair as vandals occasionally spray-painted "Murder House" across the porch. In 1995, the television show American Hauntings conducted the first organized paranormal investigation. Their footage contains several unexplained phenomena: shadow figures in hallways, whispered phrases like, "Help us," and a chilling moment when all team members heard what sounded like a child drowning, coming from the empty basement tub. In 1998, survivor Elias Dawson returned for a documentary. "The moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt it, the same heaviness in the air," Dawson told the camera. "This house doesn't just contain memories. It contains something alive and aware. The Mathers didn't create the evil here. They were consumed by it." The final significant discovery came in late 1999 when engineers preparing for another demolition attempt found a previously unknown subbasement. Inside was the remains of the original sanitarium structure, complete with a child-sized examination table and damaged journals belonging to Dr. Ambrose Wharton, who operated the sanitarium before the 1894 fire. The journals revealed horrifying experiments conducted under the guise of tuberculosis treatment. Wharton wrote of accessing the subconscious mind through controlled trauma and entities that spoke through his patients, demanding offerings of pure suffering. His final entry, dated December 14, 1894, the night of the fire, read simply, "They are hungry tonight. The door is open now. May God forgive what I've done in the name of science." As the 20th century ended, each revelation about 47 Elm Street only deepened the sense that something truly inexplicable resided there, something that had claimed victims across generations and waited patiently for more to come. The new millennium brought no peace to 47 Elm Street. Instead, the digital age transformed the infamous house from local horror into global legend. The property sat abandoned through the early 2000s, its ownership tied up in legal disputes between the county, developers who had purchased tax liens, and a preservation society formed by true crime enthusiasts who argued the house should be maintained as a historical site, a proposal that outraged victims' families. As internet access became widespread, websites dedicated to paranormal phenomena featured the house prominently. Online forums allowed people to share experiences, theories, and in some cases, fabricated stories that further mythologized the location. The hashtag Elm Street Horror began trending annually around Halloween, bringing new waves of trespassers. Local resident Michael Peterson, who served as a volunteer night watchman from 2002 to 2005, described the constant intrusions. Every weekend, someone would try to break in. College students, paranormal investigators, YouTubers looking for content. I caught one group performing a seance in the basement. They had candles set up around the purification tub and were trying to communicate with the children. I've never felt right about people treating those poor kids suffering as entertainment. The early 2000s saw the first serious scientific study of the house when parapsychologist Dr. Eleanor Vance secured temporary access for research purposes. Her team installed monitoring equipment throughout the property, collecting data for 6 months. Their findings, published in the Journal of Anomalous Phenomena in 2004, documented several inexplicable occurrences. The house exhibits significant electromagnetic anomalies, particularly in areas associated with reported deaths. Audio equipment frequently captured sounds inconsistent with the environment. Children's whispers where no children were present, water splashing in dry areas, and in one remarkable instance, what appears to be Leonard Mather's voice reciting a purification prayer in the basement, 25 years after his death. Most compelling was the thermal imaging data showing cold spots in the shape of small human figures throughout the house, predominantly near walls where children had reportedly been sealed. These cold spots moved over time, appearing to follow research team members or gathering in rooms where the team set up equipment. Skeptics dismissed Vance's findings, attributing the phenomena to drafts, equipment malfunctions, or outright fabrication. Yet even the most hardened skeptics found it difficult to explain the experiences of the research assistants, 3 of whom resigned mid-study, citing night terrors and unexplainable physical symptoms, including scratches appearing on their bodies while they slept. In 2007, the county finally secured complete ownership of the property through eminent domain, citing public safety concerns. The decision to demolish the structure was unanimous, but the execution proved challenging. 2 demolition companies backed out of contracts after equipment failures and worker accidents. Rumors spread that the house was protecting itself. Father Thomas Mackenzie, a Catholic priest who had counseled several Mather victims, offered to perform a blessing before demolition. His experience, recorded in diocesan archives, suggests something beyond psychological suggestion. I've performed hundreds of blessings and several formal exorcisms during my ministry. Nothing prepared me for what I encountered at Elm Street. The atmosphere was oppressive, like walking through water. As I began the ritual, the temperature plummeted. My prayer book slammed shut repeatedly. Most disturbing was the laughter, childlike but wrong somehow, emanating from the walls themselves. I completed the rites, but left with absolute certainty that no blessing would cleanse that ground. Some places absorb too much suffering to ever be truly purified. The house was finally demolished in October 2008, almost 30 years after the Mathers' deaths. Media covered the event extensively, with cameras capturing the moment the structure collapsed. Several viewers later claimed to see faces in the dust cloud that rose from the rubble, small, gaunt faces with dark, hollow eyes. Survivor Alice Cooper, who had escaped with Elias Dawson in 1979, attended the demolition. Her statement to reporters captured the sentiments of many victims. Tearing down the walls doesn't destroy what lived inside them. You can't demolish memory or pain. That house wasn't just a building. It was a vessel for something older and hungrier than bricks and mortar. The vacant lot remained fenced off, with no development planned. For several years, it served as an unofficial memorial site where people left flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes for the children who had suffered there. At night, however, the property continued to draw thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts who reported cold spots, battery drains in electronic equipment, and the persistent sound of children's whispers coming from the empty ground. In 2012, tragedy struck when 3 college students broke into the fenced area for a midnight courage test, live-streamed on social media. The video, which has since been removed from official platforms but continues to circulate on darker corners of the internet, shows the students joking as they enter the property. Their behavior changes drastically around the 15-minute mark when they approach the former basement area. One student, visibly unsettled, says, "Do you hear that? Kids singing." Another student's phone camera captures a small handprint appearing in the dirt, forming without any visible pressure. The stream becomes chaotic as the students panic and run toward the fence. The last clear image shows one student, Jessica Larson, turning to look behind her, her expression frozen in terror. 2 students escaped with minor injuries from climbing the fence. Jessica Larson was found the next morning in the center of the property, unresponsive and suffering from hypothermia despite the mild temperature. She remained in a catatonic state for weeks, eventually recovering physically but refusing to discuss what happened. In her only public statement, she said simply, "They're still there. They're always hungry. And now they know my name." The incident prompted the county to increase security, installing cameras and hiring regular patrols. Nevertheless, the site continued to experience unexplained phenomena. Maintenance workers reported tools disappearing, only to be found arranged in patterns resembling children's games like hopscotch or Ring Around the Rosie. Security cameras frequently malfunctioned, capturing only static or, in several notable instances, footage of what appeared to be small shadows moving across empty ground. In 2015, ground was broken for a memorial park dedicated to all children who had suffered abuse, with special recognition of the Elm Street victims. The design deliberately avoided religious symbolism, focusing instead on themes of healing and remembrance. The centerpiece was a sculpture of empty children's clothes cast in bronze, symbolizing the lives lost. During construction, workers unearthed previously undiscovered remains, bone fragments from at least 3 children, buried deeper than the initial investigation had searched. DNA testing confirmed these were victims from the Mather era, bringing the confirmed death toll to 14. More disturbing was the discovery of medical instruments and leather restraints dating to the sanitarium period, suggesting Dr. Wharton's experiments had been even more extensive than his journals indicated. The memorial park opened in spring 2016, providing a peaceful space for reflection and remembrance. During daylight hours, it functioned as intended, a place of healing where survivors could find closure and the community could acknowledge its failure to protect its most vulnerable members. After dark, however, visitors reported unsettling experiences. The sensation of small hands slipping into theirs, the sound of children playing when the park was empty, and the bronze-clothed sculpture apparently shifting position between visits. Park ranger Devin Williams, who worked evening shifts from 2016 to 2019, maintained a log of unusual occurrences. Most common is the singing. Around dusk, especially in winter, visitors report hearing children singing hymns, the same ones the Mathers forced their victims to learn. The playground equipment moves on windless nights. The memorial fountain has been found running at full pressure in the morning, though it's shut off automatically at closing. Worst are the footprints. Small, barefoot impressions appearing in dew-covered grass, always circling the site of the original house foundation. The 2020s brought renewed interest as supernatural reality shows and true crime podcasts revisited the case. Echoes from Elm Street, a 10-part documentary released on a major streaming platform in 2022, combined historical investigation with paranormal research, including interviews with surviving victims and night vision footage from the memorial park. The most compelling segment featured Elias Dawson's final visit to the site before his death from cancer in 2023. Now in his 60s, Dawson walked the perimeter of where the house had stood, pointing out locations with uncanny precision. "This is where the purification room was. This spot is where they buried the first child. The voice Leonard heard came from here, where the sanitarium's operating room once stood." When asked if he believed the house had been haunted, Dawson offered a more nuanced perspective. "Haunted implies ghosts, spirits of the dead lingering. What lived in that house wasn't dead. It never had been alive in the human sense. It was something that fed on suffering, that had learned to manipulate people to create more suffering. The Mathers thought they were serving God, but they were feeding something much older and hungrier than any god. And it's still here in the ground. It's patient. It can wait. By 2025, the legend of 47 Elm Street has evolved into something between historical tragedy and modern folklore. The memorial park remains, now featuring a small museum documenting the history of the site and honoring the victims. School groups visit during the day for educational programs about recognizing and preventing child abuse. The county maintains enhanced security at night, though reports of unusual phenomena continue. Most disturbing are the accounts from children who visit the park without prior knowledge of its history. Multiple parents have reported their children asking about the other kids who live underground, or mentioning the doctor who still works here at night. Several children have drawn pictures of the same figure after visits. A tall, thin man with elongated fingers and no face, standing among smaller figures with hollow eyes. Sarah Chun, the current director of the Memorial Foundation, summarizes the enduring legacy. What happened at 47 Elm Street represents a perfect storm of human evil and something perhaps beyond human understanding. The sanitarium doctor's experiments, the orphanage's neglect, and the Mathers' religious mania all seem connected by more than coincidence, as if the location itself influenced each successive tragedy, growing stronger with each cycle of suffering. We may never fully understand what dwells in this ground, but by remembering the victims and continuing to tell their stories, we ensure that whatever hungry presence remains knows we are watching. The children who suffered here are not forgotten. Their names are spoken, their experiences acknowledged. In remembrance, perhaps, there is a power stronger than the darkness that consumed so many lives. Yet on certain nights, visitors to the memorial park still report hearing children's voices calling from beneath the earth. Security cameras occasionally capture small handprints appearing on the glass of the museum displays. And sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, local residents swear they can see the silhouette of a Victorian house standing where 47 Elm Street once existed. A shadow dwelling that appears solid for just a moment before dissolving into the morning mist, waiting patiently for someone new to welcome inside. The house is gone, but its hunger remains. A darkness feeding on fear, memory, and the persistent human fascination with places where the veil between worlds grows thin. The story of Elm Street continues to evolve, a cautionary tale about the horrors humans can inflict upon one another and the possibility that some evil is not created but merely discovered, uncovered, or awakened. Some secrets, it seems, refuse to stay buried. As we close this dark journey through the history of 47 Elm Street, we're left with questions that perhaps should remain unanswered. Is evil something that resides in human hearts alone, or can it take root in the very soil beneath our feet? The story of this house, from sanitarium to orphanage to foster home to memorial, suggests that some locations become vessels for something beyond our understanding. The children who suffered within those walls deserved protection they never received. The adults who failed them, from Dr. Wharton's medical experiments to Sister Agnes's willful blindness to the Mathers' religious fanaticism, all succumbed to the same hungry influence. Each generation believed they were serving a higher purpose, never recognizing they were feeding the same darkness. Today, the memorial park stands as both warning and remembrance. The small bronze shoes, forever empty, remind us of lives cut tragically short. The preserved foundation stones mark boundaries that were crossed repeatedly by those who should have been protectors. And sometimes, when the light fades and the park grows quiet, visitors still report the sensation of small hands reaching out, seeking the comfort and safety these children were denied in life. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this story isn't the possibility of supernatural forces, but how easily humans can justify cruelty when they believe they serve a greater purpose. The true horror of 47 Elm Street wasn't just what might have lived in the walls. It was the monsters who walked freely through the front door, welcomed by society and trusted with our most vulnerable. If you've stayed with me through all 6 chapters of this haunting tale, I want to thank you for bearing witness to these children's stories. Their names and faces may be lost to time, but their experiences deserve acknowledgement. So the next time you pass an old house with boarded windows and overgrown grounds, remember that every building holds stories, and some stories never truly end. If this series has affected you as deeply as it has me, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Each like and share helps ensure these forgotten histories reach more people. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or perhaps a similar local legend from your own hometown. What abandoned places haunt your community's memory? What whispers follow you when you walk past certain doorways? Until our next dark journey together, remember to listen carefully when old houses seem to speak. Sometimes they're trying to warn us, and sometimes they're extending an invitation none of us should accept.